We're delighted to welcome Matt Hilton today as our speaker. Matt, I'm sure you'll introduce yourself in a moment, but just to give everyone a little bit of background, Matt's the director of Brimstone Energy, a local renewable energy company, and they are dedicated to making low carbon energy accessible for everyone. Uh, what I really like is the company's built on values of trust, clarity, and integrity. Um, and I came across Matt because Matt's worked with village halls and sports club previously, so he understands the challenges which community buildings face. Um, I think we'll get straight into it. Matt, I'll hand over to you, uh, and I'll drive the slides. So just let me know as and when you need to move on.
So thanks very much, Ollie. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to be able to present to you this morning. So if you roll to the next slide, Ollie. So the scope of the brief, we'll speak for about 20 minutes, thereabouts, and there'll be plenty of time for questions. It will be a relatively high-level brief because obviously I don't know the ins and outs of what everyone's background is and your knowledge. Some of you will probably know all about solar PV and have had it on your house for 10 years, but others will not. So we'll just remind ourselves why this is important, talk about the different technologies with solar PV and battery storage, look at two case studies. Sorry, much okay. Do you want to open that one? There's not much I can. Is that sound no good for everybody? I've not had that particularly before. Look at a couple of case studies that we've worked on earlier this year, and then just some tips for dealing with contractors. Just some things to think about when you are when you're at the stage, potentially you've got some grant funding available, and you're at the stage of trying to deal with some contractors and things to think about at that point. Next slide, please. So who are we? We're an MCS accredited company for solar and battery storage. We've onboarded with which trusted traders who are endorsed as a company by them and meet their standards. We've set the organisation up on three key values of trust, integrity and quality. We know absolutely that this industry has had some bad reputations in the past. So where we set up to be different from the mainstream is that we really want to empower customers with knowledge. So too many customers in the solar battery storage market are reliant on the operator to give them the information because it's something they don't know about, and then they get taken advantage of. So what we are setting out to do through forums like this and through our website and our YouTube channel is to provide good quality information to people so that they know what they're talking about when they are dealing with contractors. Next slide, please. So to remind ourselves, why is solar PV and battery storage so important, and why is it so important right now? The UK electricity prices, as we all know, are extremely high. They're elevated post sort of 2020, post the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But also, really is worth noting that the prices in the UK are much higher than pretty much in every other country in the world. So we're paying well over twice what the USA is paying, and it's very, very volatile. So the price we pay at any moment in time changes on the wholesale market, and that feeds through into things like the price cap that you have to deal with domestically. And as we can see here on the 21st of January 2025, so just earlier this year, here in the UK, the wholesale market here was almost 5 times more costly than it was in France at the same moment in time. So that really just puts it in perspective. Energy prices are high, and it's likely they're going to stay high for the foreseeable future. These are issues that are out of our control, but we try and work with them as best we can. Next slide, please. So with solar PV itself, there are a few key things to think about with your premises. So the solar panels themselves work when there is light hitting them. So they will start activating at dawn. So you will see voltage within those panels and within those cables at dawn and through all the way through to dusk. But the amount of electricity that is generated is directly related to the sunlight hitting that panel directly. So shading is very important. The orientation of the buildings is very important, and the roof angle is very important. So a shallow roof is very, very good for generating in the summer months, but it is less good in the winter months. A more steeply inclined roof angle is actually much better for the autumn and the winter, due to the way that the sun is directly hitting that roof as opposed to skimming off the surface of it. Next slide, please. So recently I was asked to go and look at Stony Stanton Village Hall, which is over in Leicestershire. And the parish council there are very keen to do, as many of you on the call will be, very keen to do something with their building. Like many such buildings, it's an old school that's been converted into a village hall. The village hall has multiple roof aspects. So there's a lot of south-facing roof there and a lot of east and west-facing roofs. So in theory, it would generate a lot of electricity throughout the course of the day. However, as you can see from these pictures, and this is what the village clerk, the parish clerk was phoning me about, you know, there really are some very large trees on the back of this building. And to go back to that point I made at the beginning in terms of choosing your contractors, you know, they have had quotes to install solar PV on this roof despite these trees. And obviously I've gone back to them and said, look, these trees will dramatically impact the amount of generation you're going to get. Those trees don't lie within their boundaries, so they would have to find some way of tackling them. They actually lie in an old quarry. But just to say that in the autumn and the winter, you won't really see much sun hitting that roof at all. Whereas in the summer, it's so high it can actually still reach that roof. Next slide, please. So orientation of the roof is important. Now, traditionally here in the UK, we think of south-facing roofs are always the best. And if you only have one roof available, it is almost certainly going to be the south-facing roof. It provides the most generation overall. However, there are some nuances around that you might want to think about. So your peak generation, so when you're generating the most electricity, is going to be around, you know, sort of from 11 through to 2 o'clock. And you're going to get quite a sharp peak of generation there. And this is just an indicative diagram here for you to look at. So when you're generating that electricity, can you use or store this peak electricity? And that is quite important to think about, because with your facilities, are they used from dawn till dusk, or are they in fact only ever used in the evening? If they're only used in the evening, the fact you're generating a huge amount of electricity at midday is actually of fairly little use. So then you've got to think about how you're going to store that. When we're thinking about the economics of solar PV and battery storage, self-consumption of the electricity that you generate is always the best way of using that electricity. If we need to store it, we can, but storing adds cost and complexity. So we always want to be thinking about how we can self-consume that electricity. Next slide, please. So it may actually be the case that for you an east-west array might be better. It is possible the overall generation could be more because you're going to get that early generation in the morning. So if you think about, you know, today was a really lovely sunny day, the sun was up brightly shining at sort of 7:30, 8 o'clock. And if you've got an east-facing array, you are generating maximum yield at 8 in the morning, which for some operations might be perfect. It smooths out the peak by having an east-west array. So rather than having this concentration of electricity generation in the around about noon, we actually get more equalized generation throughout the day. And to use Boris's sort of famous phrase from a few years ago, you know, it squashes a sombrero, so you are getting more even generation throughout the day. Next slide, please. So this builds up. So a couple of things to think about. You know, we hear, and the next one, please. Yeah. So we hear that, you know, it's too expensive, and especially it's too expensive for my community facility. Now, costs of solar PV itself have fallen very substantially. Solar panels in and of themselves are, well, they've never been cheaper. It's hard to see how they can actually go lower cost than they are now. So the lowest cost panel at the wholesaler at the moment, in September 2025, you can pick them up for £46 ex VAT. So it's hard to see how they're going to get much cheaper than that. That's probably almost cheaper than the equivalent amount of wood if you go down to the timber merchant. Maintenance is difficult and costly. These panels are mass produced on an enormous scale these days, primarily over in China. They are designed to have a very long lifespan. Warranties can be in excess of 25 years. There are some panel manufacturers that are offering 30-year warranties, and these warranties will cover not only the product themselves, but also the power generation at year 30. So what is that panel going to be generating in year 30? And it's likely that at year 30, assuming that it's still clean and in good condition, you can expect it to be generating at least 80% of the original generation. So what to do with the surplus energy? This is obviously a key question. Now, if you do engage in battery storage, what that can do for you is allow to store the electricity during your peak generation period and then export surplus electricity to the grid later in the day. This sort of speaks to the idea of something called a virtual power plant. So virtual power plants are the idea of having aggregated batteries up and down the country. Let's say, just to think about your village or your streets, you might have 50 houses across your village with battery storage. There'll be a remote signal from a central control room that will turn those batteries on to discharge into the grid, which will then help support your local market and your local consumption of electricity. Now, these virtual power plants, they're not pie in the sky. They are real. They're happening today as we speak. And the regulations in the UK have now been amended, and we're likely to see wide-scale adoption of virtual power plants over the coming sort of 12 to 24 months. Next slide, please. So planning regulations have changed very recently. So solar panels can be installed on heritage buildings, and whilst you will need permission to put them on listed buildings themselves, if you're just talking about a conservation area and a building within a conservation area, that can go ahead, usually without planning permission itself. But if we can install, not our company, but if a local company in Cambridgeshire can install solar panels on King's College, Cambridge, they can almost certainly be installed on your buildings. And lastly, just to really sum up this point, is that solar really is now a well-established technology. To put it in context for you of how much solar is being produced, in 2024, China, so this isn't the manufacturing of solar panels, this is what was installed into the Chinese national grid, generating power. China deployed 277 gigawatts of solar power in 2024 alone. So the UK total generating capacity, just to put this in some kind of context for you, so including all our nuclear power stations, wind, gas turbines, etc., is only 75 gigawatts. So this really is a form of power that's been deployed at unprecedented scale. Now, I always tend to think of solar as being the relatively dumb hardware. So solar will produce power as long as there's light. And it works irrespective of demand. So whether or not you want that power, it's coming, which can be problematic at a national level. Batteries, on the other hand, are really the brains of the operation. So batteries will manage the supply of power to your property with the aim to minimize the import of electricity from the grid, maximize self-consumption, and thereby lower your costs. So next slide, please. So when I say that, what I'm specifically talking about is the battery management system being the brains of the operation. So the battery itself is, again, probably just another bit of dumb hardware, although there's quite a lot of electronics going on around the battery. But it's the battery management system that's the clever bit. So it's doing two principal things. Firstly, it's managing the battery cells. So batteries can't just be charged or discharged over and above a certain limit. Otherwise, there is degradation to that battery. So they need to be protected and to be managed, and that's what the battery management system does. So it monitors all sorts of parameters, everything from battery voltage, grid voltage, the current that's flowing through it, the temperature of the inverter, the temperature of the battery, and all of these different things. This extends the battery life and ensures that it's safe to operate. The second thing is this internet connectivity. Now, I've just mentioned virtual power plants already, but really this is that piece about buying and selling power to the grid on demand. And the point I didn't make earlier is that it's the on-demand thing that's really important. So if you're exporting power to the grid at tea time, when the demand for power is the highest, you can get paid a premium. So that's the really interesting thing about virtual power plants. And in the tests that were done a couple of years ago, people were getting paid, myself personally was getting paid £4.25 per kilowatt hour, bearing in mind that I was importing it overnight for 8.5p. That was a pretty good return on investment. And the other thing to think about is smart integration. So by having that internet connectivity, the battery manufacturer will have a portal where you can look at the production, they can monitor it remotely, and they can also do predictive maintenance. So they can send software updates over the internet into that battery. And so that is an actual point for when you're thinking about installing battery storage and solar PV, is that you will need internet. If you don't have internet, there are sort of 4G dongles that are available to help with that connectivity, but ideally you've got a hardwire or a Wi-Fi connection. So just things to think about with battery suppliers. You don't want to go installing batteries which are non-tested for the UK market. So we have to go through a strict set of tests in order to be able to import them into this country. You can, and this applies to your domestically as well, you can go out into the open market and purchase lower cost batteries which haven't necessarily been through all of this testing. Just be very, very cautious about that when you see adverts out there for very, very cheap batteries. That's because they probably don't have all of these safety features. Next slide, please. And just to hammer this point home, you may well have heard in the news about things like e-scooters catching fire. There have been a number of house fires involving e-scooters parked in lobbies of buildings, etc. And this is because they are not managed by a battery management system. You're plugging that battery in, it gets full, and the power keeps trying to come into that battery. It degrades the battery itself, and then in the worst case scenario, it can cause a problem. This is not what we're talking about with this technology. It's very highly regulated, and that battery management system protects that battery from overcharging. Next slide, please. So a few myth busters here as well. So most batteries now will last, they are warranted for at least 10 years, and the longest warranties are out to 15 years. So during that time, there will be some natural degradation to the battery cells, which means that the capacity of the battery on day one is 100%, and out to year 15, you can expect it to be somewhere between 60 and 70%. So at 70%, it's still providing you with a good, decent service, and it continues to operate as expected, but that is just that capacity is lower as it goes on. But you can't find any other products on the market that are going to have a 15-year warranty. So that really just goes to show the quality of the products. Too expensive for community buildings. Well, we've done a couple of projects this year, which we'll share with you, where we have installed battery storage. And really, it's the battery storage, just to really emphasize this, it's the battery storage that's really been a game changer for this technology. It's the battery storage which makes this kind of product a worthwhile investment because of that way it manages the energy flows in the building. Next, please. And so lastly, in terms of maintenance and attention, these systems are designed to be low maintenance. There are no user maintainable parts within the products. If there was any work to be done on the product, it would really come back to either the installer or more likely the manufacturer to take a look at that. It's not something you don't open these products up and start fiddling around. Next slide, please. So we're going to have a look at two case studies. We'll start off with Caxton Village Hall. Now, that QR code just takes you to a video on our YouTube channel where you can see a little bit of more detail and visually as to what we did there. So like many community facilities up and down the county, this particular building, it's actually owned by the Diocese of Ely, and it's put on a peppercorn rent to Caxton Parish Council. So Caxton Parish Council are responsible for the upkeep and the maintenance of the building. It is an old schoolhouse, so it's got a big vaulted ceiling in there. The walls are not insulated, they are solid brick walls. It doesn't retain heat. It's not on the gas grid. So they're using electricity to heat this building. And in the winter, they use absolutely huge quantities of electricity. They use that electricity at peak times when people need it. And it's very, very expensive. To put that in a little bit more context for you, the grant hire charges for this hall, when you actually look at the maths of it, and they hadn't really been doing this until we got involved and started going through their bills with them. They were actually losing money every time they hired this hall out because people would come in, turn that heating on for half an hour prior to the usage. Bearing in mind, you go in there, it's 5 to 10 degrees. So turn that heating on for half an hour before you want to use it for whatever craft club or brownie group or whatever. And then it's on for that whole of that hour duration. For that 90 minutes, they're consuming so much power, it's actually costing more than they were actually getting in higher charges. So we discussed in detail with them the specifics of the building, how they were using the building, when it was being used. They managed to get a grant off South Cambridgeshire District Council for £15,000, I believe, which funded obviously the vast majority of the work. And because this particular facility did not have an income other than those higher charges, but those higher charges that we discussed were almost negligible. There was no real maintenance budget for this building. There was no real way for them to invest in it other than through getting grants. So because of that, we chose a particular type of system for them. So we chose a microinverter system. So I don't want to get too much into the weeds of what that is, but just simply to say that each panel has a microinverter, which then takes the solar power and converts into alternating current, which is then used in the building. The principal reason for doing this was because both the panel and the microinverter have extremely long warranties. So these microinverters have a 25-year warranty. So we in our discussions with Caxton Parish Council, we said, look, if we do it this way, you can view this as a generational investment. We'll do this in 2025, and the warranties don't expire until 2050, and you should still have some power coming off this roof in 2060. So if we do it this way, you don't have to spend any more money maintaining this system. If something goes wrong, that'll be covered by Enphase themselves, who will supply you with replacement equipment and a fee that goes towards any scaffolding charges or any installer costs. That's how much they are standing behind their warranty. Because we were doing the solar PV in this particular way, we did have some money left over in the budget for a battery storage system. This system is a relatively small system, and it's just there to help support, to store some of the power and help support some of the heating. If they turn all of their heating on all at once, there is no battery system or no non-containerized commercial grade battery system that could have supplied the amount of power they needed. And bearing in mind that's such short chunks of the day, it didn't seem like a good use of money. So we've got a smaller battery unit there, which supports the building heating when required. Next slide, please. Oh, so just to say, this is the performance that this system has done. So it's installed earlier this year, sort of late January. It's produced 6,000 kilowatt hours. Okay, what is 6,000 kilowatt hours? Well, it's double what the building consumed. Okay, the building is in the same time period consumed 3,000 kilowatt hours or 3 megawatt hours. So a lot of that from that chart you can see is getting exported, for which they're getting paid 16 pence a unit. Obviously, the shoulder months are coming in. The sort of this side of winter is coming in, so that consumption will go up quite considerably. And we should see, I expect to see that over the course of 12 months, this building is effectively net zero in terms of its production and consumption. Next slide, please. So looking at St Ives Rugby Club now, again, there's that QR code, which will be available in the slide pack for you to look at later. So again, this was also grant funded, very similar cost to the other one, but we took a slightly different approach. St Ives Rugby Club's a big organisation. Whilst it relies on volunteers and donations, it does generate revenue. So they can generate funds from within the club more effectively than the village hall. So we took a slightly different approach. We wanted to maximise the solar power that we could generate on that portion of the roof. So we managed to fit 26 panels in there. The panels we've used are still high quality panels, but they're actually lower cost than those ones on Caxton. We've installed a Give Energy system, an 11 kilowatt 3-phase inverter with 20 kilowatt hours of battery storage. So what does 20 kilowatt hours do for you? Well, in this instance, on a day where the floodlights are not turned on at the club, but the equipment in the bar is still working, the building is in use they actually rent out part of the building to a school, so there's a lot of electricity being used in the building. They can be, and it's a nice sunny day, they can be importing zero electricity for about 20 out of 24 hours. So if they were to go the full 24 hours, they'd probably need probably another 10 kilowatt hours of storage would probably do it. So 30 in total. What has this meant for the club? There's been a huge reduction in ongoing electricity costs. I mean, it really is quite tremendous. Standfast, when they turn those floodlights on, they are consuming 30,000 watts of power when every single post is lit up, which they try not to do unless they really need to. But so there's not a system on the market really that was a viable system that would produce enough power to support all of that consumption. The steady state consumption, we've got that covered. Next slide, please. So total solar production for the year. So this was sort of a February install that we did. So just shy of 10 megawatt hours there, 10,000 kilowatt hours, of which 2,000 has been exported and the balance has all been consumed. You can see 3,000 kilowatt hours is going in and out of that battery. So a huge proportion of the consumption is going via that battery. Next slide, please. So just to finish on then, a couple of things to think about. A couple of things to think about when dealing with contractors. There can be a sort of, there could be a sort of lack of trust between the client and the contractor. You might be going out to multiple contractors. Well, you'll almost certainly be going out to multiple contractors and having a conversation with them, getting them to produce a quote for you. What I would just say is just build relationships with those contractors, because as you can see that, whilst a solar panel is a solar panel in many respects, it's about the system design and what do you want that system to achieve for you. And that takes engagement between you and the contractor. So being open with them, about how much money there is to spend, being open with them with all the usage patterns and the data. So understanding the data of your consumption data, when is it consumed? That's really important. And lastly, don't over obsess about the equipment. So there are lots of products available on the market. Most of it is all to a really good standard. So whether you choose one brand over another, that's less important than the overall system working for your benefit. So don't stress the equipment too much, is what I would say. So that's the end of the presentation. Happy to take any questions that you might have.